Hello, friends, and welcome back to r/MaliciousCompliance. We start our video with the story of the dumbest and most useless boss of all time. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. New and totally unqualified boss gets no formulas from me. I was recently passed up for what I thought was a sure thing promotion for an outside hire that had 20 years of client support department management experience. I figured whatever, if he's this good, maybe he'll bring in some great ideas and we'll work together to build something awesome. Nope. My new boss gets to his desk, next to mine, the first day and starts trying to run some spreadsheets for call numbers. After an hour of quiet fumbling, he leans over to me with a post-it note list and says, "I need you to show me this stuff." I laughed when I read the first item on the list because I figured he was messing with me. Negative. This 20-year veteran of call center management who's getting paid $65K a year needs help with the tasks like set up reminders in Outlook, organize numbers in Excel from high to low, get my laptop to not turn off when I close the screen. F. That first week was hell as I gradually learned that he was more than completely unqualified for this position he snuck into. I helped him where I could, but he was fairly clueless to the point that basic Windows functionality was a challenge for him. Every time he asked me where the start button was or what the icon for Excel looked like, I grew angrier. All I could think was, based on his level of technical knowledge, mentally disabled golden retriever, he must have interviewed more brilliantly than 1,000 supernovas. That weekend, I decided wasn't going to let his presumption get him praise and reward for my hard work. On Monday, he pulled me over to his computer to help him figure out how to organize the call time data he was looking at, averages, sums, etc. A simple formula could give him exactly what he wanted, or hell, he could just click drag to call him to get a fast read of the data he wanted, but he didn't bother to look it up, so I didn't bother to tell him about it. Instead, I told him the best option for what he wanted was probably to calculate it manually. I didn't get more specific than that. Sure enough, my new boss pulls out his fancy 256GB iPhone and starts tapping away on the calculator app. I went back over to my desk and smiled to myself every time he cursed under his breath when he accidentally hit clear and had to start over. Tell him to delete System 32. And our second story. Fire me on the spot for a bullcrap reason and blame me for not doing my job? Okay, I'll play that game. I'm prideful on being a hard worker and do things to the best of my abilities. I always show up at least a half hour before my shift starts, never give any hassle, and make sure everything on my end is square before I punch out. I wasn't sure which path to take career-wise and worked multiple jobs including auto, retail, and temp agencies before I settled for the medical field. I was an emergency medical technician for 10 years before moving on to something better for myself. During those years, I developed my strong spine and very thick skin needed to survive not only the field but life itself. I also learned to stand up for myself and not take crap for things that were not my fault. It basically helped make me the person I am today. I wouldn't change a thing. Now for the short intro about my former employer. They're a small medical transport company that seemed okay at first, but as usual, things take a turn for the worse after an X amount of time. The way your schedule worked was you were told the day prior what your start time was for your shift the following day. It was the dispatcher's prime responsibility to tell or call and let you know when your next shift was. This is very important later on. Also, I'll add more details about them as I go on. I was working for this company for several months and had a few issues here and there, mostly the lack of supplies and oxygen that's critically needed for us to properly do our jobs. Also, the dispatcher kept getting pissy with me for taking my time to accurately document my patient care reports when I had to take my patient to the emergency room. For those that are not in the field, when you take a patient anywhere, especially the ER, you need to document everything that's wrong with the patient. What you did for treatment/interventions, vitals, and their reactions to such before you get to the hospital. So basically, the more that was wrong with them, the more you had to do. The longer your narrative had to be, and the longer it took for you to write it. We had paper reports, which I had to give a copy of to the nurse for their documentation, plus most of the time the trip was too short or too bouncy for me to even write anything more than simple information. So once I got to the hospital, I had to wait once I gave my verbal report to the nurse and transfer the patient to a hospital stretcher before finally having time to even start my narrative. No matter how many times I try to explain this concept to the dispatcher, they always assumed I was doing it on purpose, even though I was actually doing my job like I was supposed to. But I digress. As for the supply and oxygen shortages I mentioned earlier, I did tell the manager and owner several times that we needed this, but always fell on deaf ears. I know I could have quit and went somewhere else, but I needed the money at the time, so I just stuck with it. I'll now finally explain why the scheduling detail was important. There was 1 week where I received no calls or voicemails whatsoever from the dispatcher. I thought nothing of it since sometimes the smaller companies have slow weeks, and those that are favored or have more seniority get shifts first. That was until I went in one Friday for my paycheck. I walked into the office and asked for my paycheck, to which I was told they needed my uniforms before I could get it. I asked several times why, to no avail. I got into an argument with the manager, during which the dispatcher chimed in saying I didn't do my job and answer all the calls and voicemails they left me throughout the week. I then showed my phone with no calls or voicemails that never magically appeared the entire week. I stated that I would have called back if I'd ever gotten them. So at this point, I'm now jobless. I have to make a 40-minute round trip to get my uniform and back. There's one more thing about me that I forgot to mention earlier. I don't take kindly to getting effed over. As I was getting my uniforms, I started to hatch a plan. I took my uniforms back, got my last check, and went home to turn my plan into fruition. I called the Department of Health, EMS division, and logged a formal complaint. They asked if I could submit a detailed complaint in email form, to which I happily complied, listing every single violation that I saw, including the missing supplies from the ambulances with empty main and/or portable oxygen tanks, ambulances with no air conditioning in the patient compartment, which is a very big no-no, especially if you have a patient with breathing problems, and unsecured main oxygen tanks in the storage room. For those that are curious, I'm not a complete jerk. I did give advance warning to the ones that I became friends with, and I knew for certain wouldn't rat on me. I learned the fallout a few weeks later from a buddy. The state dropped by for a surprise inspection. The dispatcher was also fired. They took several ambulances out of service and gave them several $1,000s in fines. You are a GD hero for sticking up for the patients against that EMT company. If that was in a large city, you can bet that would have been in the news too. And our last story. Entitled family thinks they own the entire beach. Quick backstory. My family, who aren't involved in this story, and family friends own beach houses in a little bay area that eventually leads out to the ocean. There are several small piers within the boardwalk area where families can swim and jump off the piers. They have netting surrounding the pier to indicate how far families can swim. Beyond the netting, that's where boats, kayaks, etc. can run. Unfortunately, on these piers, there have been some entitled people believing they own some of these piers because their beach house is right there behind it. I will admit, our family has had our beach house for over a century, passed down through several generations. Even though we always have to walk down the street to get to this pier, I think if anybody deserves that pier, it should be us. Anyways, on to the cast of our story. FF is family friend. N is family friend's neighbor. EM is B-word. EK is spawn of B-word. ND is neighbor's daughter. The first part of the story happened to N, who eventually told FF what happened. After swimming hours are over at the pier, families like to go there to catch crabs. Only crabs that measure within a certain size can be kept. Because of the whole thing with social distancing, N and ND went to try and find a good spot away from other families so they could crab. They actually got a really good spot at the end of the pier away from everybody else, and they set up their things there. They were only planning on catching a few crabs, then heading out. It was only a few minutes into their crabbing when the 15 to 16-year-old EK came marching right on up to N and ND. EK, hey, you're in my spot. N looked around, trying to find anything to show that the kid's spot was taken. Nets, cages, buckets, etc. There weren't any. They were the only ones there. Everyone else was on the other side of the pier. I'm sorry, but there's nothing here to show that this is your spot. You need to leave now. This is my spot. Kid, this is public property. Nothing here's yours. We're only going to catch a few crabs and then leave. Please be patient. EK continued to whine to N for a couple minutes before finally leaving. M couldn't believe how immature this kid was acting. Her daughter was only 10 and was acting more mature than him. Not even a few minutes later, EK came back, and who does he come with? EM, who was a full-on Karen. The blonde, let me speak to your manager hair, the sunglasses, long nails, etc. She went right on over to N and did that throat clearing nobody likes. EM, excuse me, I heard you two made fun of my son and won't let him have his spot back. N, we never insulted him, and there was nothing here to show that this is his spot. We're only here to catch a few crabs and then we'll head out. No, you need to leave his spot now. Lady, we're not going anywhere. EM, pointing to a house, do you see that? That's our house right there. My son has claimed this spot on the pier as his own. You must obey that or I will tell the authorities. There's nothing marked on this pier that states this is your son's spot. This pier and this entire beach and boardwalk is public property. I myself can call the authorities on you for disturbing us. It looked like N had finally put EM and EK into a corner. Just then, ND, completely oblivious to the argument and focused on crabbing, pulls out a small crab from her net and shows it to N. Before they could say anything enough, EM quickly butts in, "Give us the crab you just caught. It'll make up for all the trouble that we caused." It's too small to be kept. Who told you that? It's an actual law here. There's nothing here to prove that. N pointed to a sign that was on a pole directly behind them, explaining the rules of catching crabs. If you own this pier like you claim you do, you'd have known that. EM didn't say anything, but tried to snatch the small crab out of ND's net. ND started shaking the net over the water, hoping the crab would let go. Thankfully, before EM got to her, the small crab let go and plopped back down into the water. EM let out an ungodly howl at the sight as if she just watched her precious EK get attacked by a shark or something. Finally, she grabbed EK and stormed away from them. N and ND didn't stay too long after that and didn't catch any crabs. They both just wanted to get the hell out of there after that. Sometimes entitlement logic is extremely confusing to me. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.